The fluorescent lights of the downtown convenience store cast harsh shadows across Katherine Kate Reeves' face as she stood frozen in aisle 3, her weathered canvas bag clutched against her chest like armor. The familiar weight of fear pressed against her ribs, but something else stirred beneath it, something that had been dormant for far too long. Well, look what we got here," sneered Danny Morrison, his voice carrying the particular brand of cruelty that small men wielded like weapons. His two companions flanked him with practiced precision, blocking Kate's path to the exit. If it isn't the neighborhood charity case. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Kate's fingers tightened around her bag's worn handles. Inside, beneath groceries she'd carefully calculated to stretch her meager budget, lay items that would make these three think twice about their assumptions. But they didn't need to know that. "Not yet. Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt building in her chest. "I'd like to pass." Danny's laugh was sharp and ugly, echoing off the cramped aisles stocked with overpriced essentials. "Oh, you'd like to pass? How about you ask nicely? Maybe get on your knees and beg a little?" The store's owner, Mr. Chen, glanced up from behind the bulletproof glass that separated him from his customers, his expression torn between concern and the practiced indifference of someone who'd learned not to get involved in neighborhood drama. The security camera in the corner whirred almost imperceptibly as it adjusted its angle. Kate's brown eyes that had seen more than these boys could imagine met Danny's pale blue ones without flinching. In that moment, a decision crystallized in her mind with the clarity of breaking glass. She'd spent 5 years in this neighborhood, 5 years of letting people see exactly what they expected to see. A broken woman, defeated by circumstances. Harmless as a sparrow dot, it was time to remind herself who she really was. "I asked politely," Kate said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I suggest you step aside." The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her weight redistributing in a way that spoke of training, of muscle memory that hadn't been entirely erased by years of careful performance. Danny's friends, Marcus and Javier, exchanged uncertain glances, some primitive instinct warning them that the prey in front of them might not be what she seemed. But Danny, drunk on his own perceived power and the audience of his companions, pressed forward. "Or what, lady? You gonna cry? Call the cops? Face it, nobody's coming to save you. Nobody gives a damn about some washed up." His words cut off abruptly as Kate's bag hit the floor with a soft thud. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence, heavy with potential energy. Like the moment before lightning strikes, the transformation began with Kate's breathing. Instead of the shallow, anxious gasps that had defined her public persona for years, her breath deepened, became controlled, purposeful. Her shoulders squared, and for the first time in half a decade, Katherine Reeves allowed herself to stand. At her full height, "My name," she said, her voice carrying a new weight, "is Katherine Reeves. Not lady, not charity case, and certainly not whatever other creative insults your limited vocabulary can produce." Danny's sneer faltered slightly, but his pride had carried him too far to back down now. "Oh, excuse me, Katherine, real fancy. But you know what? I don't care what your name is. You're still just some pathetic." The movement was so fast that the security camera barely caught it. One moment Kate was standing perfectly still. The next Danny was on his knees, his arm twisted behind his back in a grip that would leave bruises. For weeks, his cry of pain and surprise cut through the store's ambient hum of refrigeration units and fluorescent ballasts. "Here's what's going to happen," Kate said conversationally, her tone as calm as if she were discussing the weather. "You're going to apologize to Mr. Chen for disturbing his business. Then you're going to leave quietly. All 3 of you." Marcus and Javier stood paralyzed, their mouths agape, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The woman they'd been prepared to intimidate the woman they'd seen shuffling through the neighborhood with her head down. Accepting their casual cruelties without protest had just disabled their leader with surgical precision. "You're crazy," Marcus finally managed, his voice cracking on the words. "Danny, she's crazy." Kate glanced up at him without releasing her. "Hold on Danny's arm. Crazy would be me losing my temper. Trust me, you don't want to see that." Behind the bulletproof glass, Mr. Chen had straightened, his hand hovering near the silent alarm button. But something in Kate's controlled demeanor, the professional way she maintained her grip, made him pause. This wasn't random violence. This was something else entirely. "Let me go," Danny gasped, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his face. "You're breaking my arm." "No," Kate replied matter-of-factly. "If I were breaking your arm, you'd know it. This is just a little pressure to ensure I have your attention." "Do I have your attention, Danny?" "Yes," he whimpered. "Good. Now about that apology." 5 years ago, Katherine Reeves had walked away from a life that most people couldn't imagine. 5 years ago, she'd been Lieutenant Colonel Katherine Reeves, United States Army Special Forces, with clearances so high they didn't appear on any public record. She'd commanded respect from hardened soldiers, had stared down enemies of the state, had made decisions that affected national security. But 5 years ago, everything had changed. The mission in Somalia had started like any other intelligence. Gathering, asset protection, surgical extraction if necessary. Kate's team had been the best, handpicked for their skills and their ability to operate in hostile territory with minimal support. They'd trusted her completely, followed her orders without question, believed in her judgment, right up until her judgment got 3 of them killed. The official report had cleared her of wrongdoing. Hostile enemy action, it had read, no negligence on the part of commanding officer, but Kate knew better. She'd seen the ambush coming 30 seconds too late, had made the call that put her people in the line of fire, had watched as lives she was responsible for protecting were snuffed out. In a burst of automatic weapons fire, the guilt had consumed her from the inside out. The nightmares, the panic attacks, the crushing weight of responsibility for lives lost under her command, it had all led to a medical discharge and a descent into a carefully constructed hell of her own making. She'd moved to this neighborhood specifically because it was the kind of place where someone could disappear, where a broken woman with a small disability pension could blend into the background. She'd cultivated weakness like a garden, nurturing the appearance of helplessness until even she sometimes forgot who she used to be. But muscle memory was a stubborn thing. Training like hers didn't just disappear because you wanted it to. And sometimes when pushed hard enough, the real Katherine Reeves clawed her way to the surface. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen," Danny gasped, his voice tight with pain. "I'm sorry for causing trouble in your store." Mr. Chen nodded slowly, his dark eyes moving between Kate and her captive. "Apology accepted. You boys should go now." Kate released Danny's arm and stepped back, her posture returning to something approximating normal. But the 3 young men scrambling toward the exit weren't fooled by the performance. They'd seen behind the mask, and what they'd found there had shaken them to their cores. "This isn't over," Danny snarled as he reached the door, cradling his injured arm. "You think you're tough? I got friends. Real friends. This neighborhood ain't big enough for freaks like you." Kate's smile was thin and completely without warmth. Looking forward to it. The electronic chime of the door seemed to hang in the air long after the 3 had disappeared into the night. Kate bent to retrieve her fallen bag, her movements careful and controlled. Inside, among the budget groceries, her fingers brushed against items that shouldn't have been there, items that a helpless woman living on disability payments had no business owning. "You okay, Miss Kate?" Mr. Chen asked, his voice soft with concern. She looked up, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of vulnerability and defeat. "I'm fine," she said quietly, "just fine." But as Kate walked home through the dim streets of her adopted neighborhood, she knew that nothing would ever be fine again. The carefully constructed life she'd built was starting to crumble, and she had no idea what would be left when the dust settled. Her apartment was a study in careful mediocrity, second-hand furniture, generic art from discount stores, nothing that would draw attention or suggest anything other than modest means. But hidden behind a false wall in the bedroom closet was a different story entirely. Kate moved the concealing panel with practiced ease, revealing a collection that would have made most police departments envious. Combat knives, tactical gear, body armor rated for military use, and several firearms that weren't available to civilian purchase. At the center of it all, in a place of honor, hung her dress uniform, the one she'd worn to the funerals of the soldiers who died under her command. She stared at the uniform for a long moment, her fingers tracing the ribbons and commendations. That represented a lifetime of service. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, commendations for valor and leadership that seemed to belong to someone else. Now her phone buzzed with an incoming text. Kate pulled it from her pocket, expecting spam. Or maybe a reminder from the library about an overdue book. Instead, she found a message from a number she didn't recognize. "We know who you really are. Time to come out and play." Kate's blood turned to ice water in her veins. The number was local, which meant someone in her neighborhood had connected. Katherine Reeves, the disabled veteran, with Lieutenant Colonel Katherine Reeves of the U.S. Army Special Forces. Someone had done their homework, and that someone was now making contact. A second message arrived before she could fully process the first. "Riverside Park, midnight. Come alone, or we start making calls to people who might be very interested in your new address." Kate's hands were steady as she set the phone aside, but her mind was racing. After 5 years of careful anonymity, her cover was blown. Someone knew enough about her past to pose a threat, and they were confident enough to make demands. She glanced back at the hidden weapons cache, then at the clock on her nightstand. It was already past 11. If she was going to make this meeting, she needed to move fast. More importantly, she needed to decide who she was going to be when she got there. The broken woman with the canvas shopping bag, or Lieutenant Colonel Katherine Reeves. As she reached for her tactical vest, Kate's decision crystallized with painful clarity. She'd spent 5 years running from who she was, 5 years punishing herself for failures that existed more in her mind than in reality. But Danny Morrison and his friends had awakened something that had been sleeping too long. Whether she liked it or not, Katherine Reeves was back. The walk to Riverside Park took 20 minutes through streets that most residents avoided after dark. Kate moved through the shadows like a ghost, her black tactical clothing rendering her nearly invisible against the urban landscape. The weight of the Glock at her hip and the combat knife strapped to her thigh felt both foreign and familiar, like putting on clothes she'd outgrown but somehow still fit. Riverside Park was a misnomer. There was no river, just a concrete drainage channel that filled with runoff during heavy rains. The park itself was a collection of broken playground equipment and dying trees, surrounded by chain-link fence that had been cut in so many places it barely qualified as a barrier. Kate approached from the north, using the elevated position to survey the area before committing to the meeting. Old habits died hard, and reconnaissance had kept her alive through more dangerous situations than this. What she saw made her blood run cold. There were at least 6 figures positioned around the park's perimeter, too well placed to be coincidental. Professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire, tactical positions that spoke of military training. This wasn't Danny Morrison and his street-level friends. This was something else entirely. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "We see you up there, Colonel. Time to come down and chat." The use of her military rank confirmed Kate's worst fears. Whoever was behind this knew not just her name, but her service record. That kind of information wasn't available through normal channels. which meant she was dealing with people who had access to classified databases. Government, military, intelligence. Or former versions of all three. Kate made her way down into the park, her senses hyper-alert for any sign of threat. The playground sat empty in the center of the space, its swings moving gently in the night breeze like hanging bodies. Near the rusted jungle gym, a figure stepped out of the shadows. He was tall and lean with prematurely gray hair and the kind of posture that screamed military bearing. When he moved into the dim light cast by a distant street lamp, Kate's recognition was immediate and devastating. Colonel James Mitchell, her former commanding officer. The man who'd signed off on her medical discharge and watched her walk away from everything she'd ever known. "Hello, Kate," he said, his voice carrying the same authority it had 5 years ago. "You're looking well." "Sir," she replied automatically, then caught herself. "What are you doing here?" Mitchell's smile was thin and professional. "The same thing you are, I imagine. Trying to figure out how a supposedly broken-down veteran ended up handling 3 street thugs like she was still in the teens. I don't know what you mean." "The convenience store has security cameras. Kate, very good ones. Mr. Chen is a former South Vietnamese army officer who immigrated here after the war. He's got connections, friends in law enforcement who occasionally review his footage for interesting incidents." Kate's mind raced through the implications. If the footage had made its way up the chain, if people were asking questions about her identity. "Your cover's blown," Mitchell continued, as if reading her thoughts. "Has been for about 6 hours now. Which means you've got a choice to make." "What kind of choice?" "The kind that determines whether you spend the next 20 years in federal prison for desertion and identity fraud, or whether you come back to work for Uncle Sam." The words hit Kate like a physical blow. "I didn't desert. I was medically discharged, under a false identity. Katherine Reeves, disabled veteran, doesn't exist in any official capacity. The woman we discharged was Katherine Chen. Yes, she took her grandmother's maiden name, and she disappeared completely after leaving the hospital. Technically, that makes you AWOL. Technically, that makes you a deserter." Kate's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon, then stopped as she heard the distinct sound of rifle bolts being cycled from multiple positions around the park. Mitchell's backup team was making their presence known. "Easy, Kate, we're not here to arrest you. We're here to offer you a job." "What kind of job?" Mitchell reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. "The kind you were born for. The kind that will let you use those skills for something more productive than intimidating convenience store bullies." Kate accepted the folder but didn't open it. "Why now? After 5 years?" "Because the world's gotten more dangerous since you left. Because we've got problems that require someone with your particular skill set. And because, frankly, we never should have let you go in the first place." The admission hung in the air between them like a challenge. Kate had spent 5 years believing that her discharge was the end of a failed career, that her judgment had been so compromised by the Somalia incident that she was no longer fit for service. To hear Mitchell suggest otherwise was both vindicating and terrifying. "The Somalia mission," she said quietly. "The report was accurate. Hostile enemy action, no negligence on your part. But you never read the classified addendum, did you?" Kate shook her head. "The intelligence that led to that ambush came from a double agent we'd been running for months. Someone in the CIA was feeding information to hostile forces, using our operations as a way to eliminate inconvenient assets. Your team wasn't killed because of your judgment, Kate. They were murdered as part of a larger conspiracy." The folder suddenly felt impossibly heavy in Kate's hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the investigation was ongoing. Because we needed the people responsible to think they'd gotten away with it. And because, honestly, we thought you'd figure it out eventually and come back to help us hunt them down. Instead, I ran away. You grieved. There's a difference." Kate opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs of faces she didn't recognize, documents stamped with security classifications she remembered from her previous life, and a mission brief that made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. "There's a network," Mitchell explained as she read. "Former intelligence officers, military contractors, private security firms. They've been selling classified information to hostile nations for years, using active operations as cover for their activities. The Somalia incident was just the beginning." The photograph showed men and women in expensive suits, standing in corporate boardrooms and government buildings. But Kate's eye was drawn to one face in particular, a man with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "Richard Blackwood," Mitchell said, noticing her focus. "Former CIA, now head of a private military corporation called Aegis Solutions. We believe he's the one who orchestrated the Somalia ambush, along with at least 6 other operations that resulted in American casualties." Kate's hands clenched into fists. "He killed my people. He killed a lot of people. And he's still out there, still profiting from the deaths of American servicemen and women. Still selling secrets to anyone willing to pay. What do you want me to do?" Mitchell's smile was sharp and predatory. "What you do best. Hunt him down and bring him to justice. Why me? You've got other operators, other teams. Because Blackwood knows all of them. He's got access to personnel files, operation records, psychological profiles. But you've been off the grid for 5 years. You're a ghost, Kate. A weapon he doesn't. No exists." Kate closed the folder and looked around the park, taking in the positioning of Mitchell's team, the professional way they'd set up the meeting. These were her people, soldiers like herself who understood duty and sacrifice, and the weight of responsibility for other people's lives. For 5 years, she'd been running from that weight. Maybe it was time to pick it up again. "If I say yes," she said carefully, "what happens to Katherine Reeves? She disappears. Officially, she never existed. You become Kate Chen again, reactivated for special assignment. Full reinstatement of rank and privileges, complete mission authority, unlimited resources. And if I say no?" Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Then Katherine Reeves gets arrested for identity fraud. And Katherine Chen gets court-martialed for desertion. Either way, your quiet little life in this neighborhood is over." It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. Kate had been living on borrowed time since the moment she'd put Danny Morrison on his knees. The only question now was whether she'd go forward as a soldier or backward as a prisoner. "I need guarantees," she said finally. "If I do this, if I come back, I want full disclosure. No more classified addendums, no more need-to-know restrictions. I want to know everything. Done. I want to choose my own team, within reason. And I want operational independence. No micromanagement, no real-time oversight. You give me a target and you let me work." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Anything else?" Kate thought about Mr. Chen, about the way he'd looked at her after the incident with Danny Morrison. She thought about the neighborhood she'd called home for 5 years, the carefully constructed life she was about to abandon. "I want 1 week to wrap up my affairs here, to say goodbye." "Kate, I don't think you understand the urgency." 1 week, she repeated firmly, "or find yourself another ghost." For a moment, the 2 officers stared at each other across the playground. Years of shared history and mutual respect hanging in the balance. Finally, Mitchell nodded. 1 week. But Kate? After that, you're mine." As the colonel and his team melted back into the shadows, Kate stood alone in the empty park, the mission folder clutched against her chest like a shield. Around her, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy traffic, sirens, the distant sound of music from late-night clubs. But for Kate, everything had changed. The woman who'd walked into Riverside Park was Katherine Reeves, broken veteran, victim of circumstance. The woman who walked out was Lieutenant Colonel Kate Chen, United States Army Special Forces, hunter of men, and she had work to do. The morning after her meeting with Colonel Mitchell, Kate woke before dawn with the precision of an internal clock that had been calibrated by years of military service. For a moment, she lay in the familiar darkness of her apartment, listening to the sounds of a neighborhood coming to life. Garbage trucks rumbling through the streets, the distant clatter of the elevated train, the muffled arguments of neighbors whose lives intersected with hers only in passing. Everything looked the same, but Kate could feel the fundamental shift that had occurred overnight. The Katherine Reeves identity that had been her refuge for 5 years was already beginning to feel like a costume she'd outgrown. In its place, something harder and more dangerous was taking shape. She made coffee with the automatic movements of routine, but her mind was already racing through tactical considerations. If she was going back into the game, she needed to know who else was playing. The mission folder Mitchell had given her contained names and faces, but Kate knew better than to trust anything at face value. After what had happened in Somalia, trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Hope you slept well. Neighbor, we need to talk." Kate's blood ran cold. The message hadn't come from Mitchell. His communications would have been encrypted and routed through secure channels. Someone else was watching her, someone who knew about last night's meeting and wasn't afraid to make contact. A second message arrived. "Riverside Park was impressive. Professional work, but you missed something important." Kate's military training kicked in automatically. She moved away from the windows, pulled the blackout curtains closed, and activated the signal jamming device she kept hidden behind the water heater. If someone was tracking her phone, they'd just lost the signal. Her landline rang exactly 30 seconds later. "You're learning," said a voice she didn't recognize, male, middle-aged, with the kind of educated accent that spoke of expensive schools and government service. "But not fast enough. Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching you for a lot longer than Colonel Mitchell. Someone who knows that your little reunion last night was observed by more than just his team." Kate's mind raced through the possibilities. "What do you want to keep you alive?" "Do you know why Mitchell really came to you, Kate? It wasn't because you're a ghost. It was because you're expendable." "Explain." "The network you're being sent to investigate has tentacles reaching deep into the military intelligence community. Mitchell isn't hunting these people, he's working for them. And you, my dear, are being set up as the perfect fall guy." The phone line went dead, leaving Kate staring at the receiver in her hand. Around her, the apartment suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. If the caller was telling the truth, then her recruitment wasn't a second chance. It was a death sentence. But if he was lying, then she was dealing with someone who wanted to turn her against her own command structure for reasons she couldn't yet understand. Either way, she needed more information. Kate spent the next hour conducting a thorough sweep of her apartment, using equipment she'd hoped never to need again. She found 3 listening devices and a GPS tracker that hadn't been there the day before. Professional quality, military grade. The kind of surveillance gear that required significant resources to acquire and deploy. Someone had been very busy while she was at Riverside Park. She left the devices in place, but disabled them with a technique that would make them appear to be malfunctioning rather than compromised. If her watchers were professionals, they'd assume equipment failure rather than counter-surveillance. It would buy her time to figure out who was playing what game. Her next stop was the neighborhood library, one of the few places in the area with public computer access and enough ambient noise to cover a conversation. Kate logged into a terminal using an identity she'd maintained for emergencies, Sarah Mitchell, freelance journalist, and began researching the names from the mission folder. What she found made her stomach turn. 3 of the supposed network members had died in the past 6 months. Car accidents, heart attacks, a suspicious suicide, all following the same pattern she'd seen in other elimination operations. Someone was cleaning house, removing loose ends, and the official investigation into the intelligence leak was being used as cover. But the most disturbing discovery was a classified memorandum she accessed through back channels that officially shouldn't have existed. The document, dated just 2 weeks ago, authorized the use of expendable assets in the investigation of the intelligence network. The memorandum was signed by Colonel James Mitchell. Kate sat back in her chair, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a picture she didn't like. Either Mitchell was part of the conspiracy and she was being set up, or someone was using his identity to authorize operations he knew nothing about. Interesting reading? Kate spun around to find a woman standing behind her, casually browsing a shelf of romance novels. She was perhaps 40, with auburn hair and the kind of understated attractiveness that allowed her to blend into crowds. But her eyes, sharp, calculating, constantly scanning for threats, marked her as something other than a casual library patron. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Kate asked, her hand moving subtly toward the knife concealed at her waist. The woman smiled and moved closer, close enough that their conversation wouldn't carry beyond the immediate area. "Agent Sarah Walsh, FBI. And before you ask, yes, I'm the one who called you this morning. FBI doesn't have authorization for domestic surveillance of military personnel. They do when that personnel is suspected of treason." Kate's blood turned to ice. "Excuse me?" Walsh pulled a manila envelope from her purse and placed it on the table next to Kate's computer. "Katherine Chen, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army. Discharged under suspicious circumstances 5 years ago following a classified incident in Somalia. Subsequently disappeared, assumed new identity, and has been living off the grid ever since. That's not treason. It is when you've been selling classified information to foreign agents." Kate opened the envelope with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the shock coursing through her system. Inside were photographs of her meeting with Mitchell, but the images had been doctored to show her accepting what appeared to be a briefcase full of money. Bank records showed deposits to an account under her assumed name. Communication intercepts suggested regular contact with known intelligence assets. It was a masterful frame job, complete with fabricated evidence that would stand up to casual scrutiny. Someone had spent considerable time and resources building a case against her. "This is bullshit," Kate said quietly. "Is it? Because from where I sit, you look like someone who had access to classified information, faked her own death, and has been selling secrets for 5 years. The only question is whether you're smart enough to cooperate with our investigation. What do you want?" Walsh leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from predatory to almost sympathetic. "The same thing you do. The truth. Because someone has gone to a lot of trouble to make you look guilty, which means you're either a very clever traitor or a very convenient scapegoat. And you think I'm the scapegoat. I think you're a decorated officer who lost her team in a hostile action and has been punishing herself ever since. I think someone knew about your guilt and your isolation and decided you'd make the perfect fall guy for their operations." Kate studied the FBI agent's face, looking for tells, signs of deception. But Walsh's expression remained open, concerned, apparently genuine. Either she was telling the truth or she was very good at lying. "What's your interest in this?" Kate asked. 3 months ago, my partner was killed investigating the intelligence leak. Car bomb in downtown D.C., very professional job. His last communication was a text saying he'd identified the real source of the leaked information. And 12 hours later, your name surfaced as a person of interest. Convenient timing, don't you think? Kate closed the envelope and pushed it back across the table. "If you're right, then we're both in danger. The people behind this have resources, connections, the ability to manipulate official investigations. Which is why I'm suggesting we work together, unofficially. You want me to investigate the people who are framing me for treason, while those same people are using official channels to hunt me down. Walsh's smile was sharp and entirely without humor. Welcome to the world of modern espionage, Colonel. Trust no one, assume everyone's compromised, and remember that the truth is whatever serves the interests of whoever's currently winning. Kate stared at the FBI agent for a long moment, weighing her options. She could trust Mitchell, trust the system, and hope that her loyalty would be enough to protect her. She could run, disappear again, and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Or she could trust Walsh, work outside the system, and risk everything on the word of someone she'd known for less than 10 minutes. If I agree to work with you, Kate said slowly, what's the plan? We find the real source of the intelligence leaks before they finish building their case against you. We expose the conspiracy, identify the people responsible, and make sure justice is served. And if we're wrong? If Mitchell is legitimate, and you're the one setting me up? Walsh reached into her jacket and pulled out her service weapon, a regulation Glock that she placed on the table between them. Then you take this and put 2 in my chest. At this range, with your training, I wouldn't have a chance to react. The gesture was either supreme confidence or complete insanity. Kate wasn't sure which possibility was more disturbing. You're taking a hell of a risk, she said. My partner was a good man. He had a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage on a house in Arlington. He believed in justice, in doing the right thing, in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Walsh's voice carried a note of steel that spoke of personal investment. Someone murdered him to protect their secrets. I'm going to find out who, and I'm going to make them pay. Kate picked up the Glock, ejected the magazine, and checked the chamber. Fully loaded, ready to fire. She could end this conversation right now, eliminate what might be a threat, and walk away. 5 years ago, it would have been the smart play. Instead, she reloaded the weapon and handed it back to Walsh. What's our first move? Relief flickered across the FBI agent's face. We start with the one person who might have answers about what really happened in Somalia. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, former CIA analyst, now teaching political science at Georgetown University. I've never heard of her. She was the case officer running the double agent who fed you the intelligence that led to the ambush. According to her personnel file, she's been suffering from severe PTSD since the incident. Officially, she left the agency for health reasons. And unofficially? Unofficially, she's been trying to expose the conspiracy ever since. Which makes her either our best lead or our most dangerous enemy. Kate's phone buzzed with another text message. Your new friend is interesting. Tell Agent Walsh we said hello. Both. Women stared at the phone, the implications sinking in with terrifying clarity. Whoever was behind the conspiracy wasn't just watching Kate, they were monitoring her communications, tracking her movements, anticipating her next steps. We need to move, Walsh said, her hand moving to her weapon. They know we're here. No. Kate replied, her military training asserting itself. We need to think. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. This is psychological warfare. They want us panicked, making mistakes, acting without thinking. Then what do you suggest? Kate stood up and gathered her things, her movements calm and deliberate. We give them what they expect to see. You go back to your office, file a report about contacting me, play your role in their game. I'll return to my apartment, act like the confused veteran who doesn't understand what's happening. And then? Then we meet tonight, somewhere they won't expect, and we start hunting the hunters. As they prepared to leave the library separately, Walsh grabbed Kate's arm. There's something else you should know. The bombing that killed my partner? It happened outside a restaurant where he was supposed to meet a woman who claimed to have information about the Somalia incident. What woman? We never found out. She didn't show up, and her phone number was disconnected the next day. But the reservation was made under the name Katherine Reeves. Kate felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Someone had been using her identity for operations she knew nothing about, building a case against her piece by piece, connecting her to events that would cement her apparent guilt. "They've been planning this for months," she said quietly. "Years," Walsh corrected. "The earliest use of your false identity we can trace dates back to 6 months after your discharge. Someone's been very patient, very thorough." As Kate walked back to her apartment through streets that no longer felt like home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap that had been 5 years in the making. Every choice she'd made since Somalia, every decision that had led her to this neighborhood, this life, this moment, all of it might have been orchestrated by people who understood her psychology better than she understood it herself. The broken woman identity hadn't been her escape from the past. It had been her prison, keeping her isolated and vulnerable while her enemies built their case around her. But if they thought that 5 years of carefully constructed helplessness had made her weak, they were about to learn otherwise. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Chen was done running, done hiding, done playing the victim. It was time to remind the world why they'd made her a special forces officer in the first place. Kate's apartment felt different when she returned, not because anything had been moved, but because she was seeing it through new eyes. What had once been her sanctuary now looked like a carefully constructed stage set, designed to support the character of Katherine Reeves while concealing the weapons and skills of Kate Chen. She moved through the rooms methodically, not looking for surveillance devices this time, but studying the layout from a tactical perspective. Sight lines, cover positions, escape routes, defensive advantages. If this was going to be her battlefield, she needed to know every inch of it. Her phone rang at exactly 3 o'clock. Mitchell's voice was crisp and professional when she answered. "Kate, we need to accelerate the timeline. Something's come up." "What kind of something?" "The kind that means your week of preparation just became 12 hours. Richard Blackwood is in the city, attending a private security conference at the Meridian Hotel. It's the best chance we'll have to get close to him." Kate's mind raced through the implications, the sudden urgency, the convenient target, the pressure to act without adequate preparation. It all felt like manipulation. Either Mitchell was being pushed by forces above him, or he was part of the game being played against her. "That's not enough time for proper reconnaissance," she said. "I need to study the target location, identify security protocols, plan extraction routes." "The window won't stay open long," Mitchell interrupted. "Blackwood's paranoid, travels with private security, stays in public view only when absolutely necessary. This conference is the one time we know where he'll be and when. Send me the operational details. I'll review them and get back to you, Kate." Mitchell's voice carried a note of warning. "This isn't a request. It's an order. Then find yourself another operator. Because I don't take orders based on incomplete intelligence." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Mitchell spoke again, his tone carefully neutral. "I'll have a full briefing packet delivered to you within the hour. But Kate, don't take too long to decide. Opportunities like this don't come around often." After he hung up, Kate sat in her kitchen, staring at the phone and thinking about the conversation with Agent Walsh. If Mitchell was compromised, then any operation he was pushing would be designed to eliminate her rather than accomplish the stated objective. But if Walsh was the one running a game, then rejecting Mitchell's orders would paint her as an insubordinate officer who couldn't be trusted. Either way, she was being maneuvered into a position where her choices were limited and the consequences were potentially fatal. Her landline rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a local number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Reeves, this is Dr. Patricia Chen at Mercy General Hospital. You're listed as the emergency contact for Thomas Chen." Kate's breath caught in her throat. Thomas Chen was the identity she'd used on her falsified documents, supposedly her deceased husband, whose name had given her the Chen surname. Someone was using her fabricated backstory against her. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I don't know anyone by that name. He was brought in an hour ago after a severe car accident. He's asking for you specifically. Says you'll know what." The message means the ghosts of Somalia are coming home. The line went dead, leaving Kate staring at the phone in her hand. The reference to Somalia couldn't be coincidental. Someone was using her own guilt against her, playing on her psychological vulnerabilities to force her into action. But the hospital call also presented an opportunity. If someone was using the Thomas Chen identity to send her a message, it meant they'd had to create a physical presence at Mercy General. Hospital security cameras, admission records, medical staff who'd interacted with the supposed patient, all of it would leave traces. That could be followed. Kate gathered her things, including items from her hidden cache that might be necessary for what was coming. The broken woman act was officially over. If her enemies wanted to play psychological warfare, she'd show them what a professionally trained mind could do when it stopped pulling its punches. Mercy General Hospital was a sprawling complex on the south side of the city, the kind of understaffed, overcrowded facility that served the neighborhoods where people like Katherine Reeves were supposed to live. Kate entered through the emergency room, moving with the shuffling gait and defeated posture that had been her disguise for 5 years. The admissions desk was staffed by a tired-looking woman in scrubs who barely glanced up when Kate approached. "I'm here about Thomas Chen," Kate said quietly. "I got a call that he was asking for me." The nurse checked her computer screen, frowning. "I don't show anyone by that name in our system. Are you sure you have the right hospital?" Kate felt ice forming in her veins. "I received a call about an hour ago from Dr. Patricia Chen. She said he was brought in after a car accident. We don't have a Dr. Patricia Chen on staff." The nurse's expression shifted from tired to concerned. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right? Sometimes grief or stress can cause confusion. I need to speak with your head of security." "Ma'am, I really think you should." Kate's voice dropped to a tone that had once commanded Special Forces soldiers in hostile territory. "Get me your head of security, now." 5 minutes later, Kate found herself in a small office facing a retired police detective named Murphy, who looked like he'd seen every scam and con game the city had to offer. She explained about the phone call, the supposed patient, the doctor who didn't exist. "Sounds like someone's running a game on you," Murphy sighed, his expression sympathetic but wary. "Happens more than you'd think. Scammers call people, claim their loved ones are in the hospital, try to get them to reveal personal information or send money. This wasn't about money. They wanted me to come here." "For what?" Kate considered her options. She could tell Murphy the truth, explain about the intelligence conspiracy and the frame job, and watch him decide she was delusional. Or she could play the concerned civilian, gather what information she could, and leave before things got complicated. "I don't know," she said finally. "But I'd like to review your security footage from the past 2 hours. See if anyone came in asking about me or using the name Thomas Chen." Murphy's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I can't just show security footage to civilians. Even if you are family, which you're not, since the patient doesn't exist, I'd need a court order or police authorization." Kate reached into her purse and pulled out a leather wallet. Inside, behind her Katherine Reeves identification, was something she'd hoped never to use again: her military credentials, updated with her current assignment status. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Chen, United States Army, currently assigned to a classified counterintelligence operation, she said, handing Murphy the identification. "I need to see that footage." Murphy examined the credentials carefully, his demeanor shifting as he processed what he was seeing. "This says you're investigating intelligence leaks affecting national security." "I am, and someone just used your Hospital is a way to send me a message, which means your facility has been compromised as part of a larger operation. Jesus Christ. Murphy stood up and moved to his computer. You should have led with this. How far back do you want me to go? Start 2 hours ago. Focus on anyone who might have made the phone call. The security footage was surprisingly clear for a hospital system. Murphy had it displayed on multiple monitors, showing different areas of the facility from various angles. They watched in accelerated mode, looking for anyone who didn't belong. Anyone acting suspiciously. They found him at the 1 hour 47 minutes and 22 seconds mark. A man in expensive suit had entered through the main lobby, walked directly to the information desk and engaged in a brief conversation with the staff. The timestamp showed that his visit corresponded exactly with the time Kate had received the phone call. Can you get me a clear image of his face? Kate asked. Murphy enhanced the footage, zooming in on the man's features. Kate felt her stomach drop as recognition hit her like a physical blow. Marcus Webb, former Special Forces, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for selling weapons to insurgent groups in Afghanistan. She'd known him during her time in the teams, had even considered him a friend before his corruption came to light. You know him? Murphy asked, noticing her reaction. Yeah, and if he's involved in this, then things are worse than I thought. Webb's presence meant that the conspiracy had access to former special operations personnel, people who knew Kate's psychology, her training, her likely responses to various stimuli. They weren't just using her guilt against her, they were using her own teammates. I need copies of this footage, Kate said. And I need you to flag any further attempts to use the Thomas Chin identity. Done? But Colonel, if these people are willing to use a hospital as part of their operation, what's to stop them from escalating? Maybe using patients or staff as leverage? Kate had been thinking the same thing. Do you have off-duty police officers you can bring in for extra security? Some, but if this is really about national security, shouldn't you be calling in federal resources? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kate couldn't explain that federal resources might be compromised, that the people hunting her might be wearing badges and carrying government credentials. Murphy was offering to help, but accepting that help would put him and his hospital at risk. I'll handle it through my own channels, she said finally. Just be extra vigilant for the next few days. As Kate left the hospital, her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Walsh. Need to meet. Have information about Webb. Same place as before, 20 minutes. The library was nearly empty when Kate arrived, most of the afternoon crowd having moved onto other activities. She found Walsh at a computer terminal in the reference section, surrounded by printed documents and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Marcus Webb, Walsh said without preamble. Former Special Forces, discharged for arms dealing. Currently employed by Aegis Solutions as a private military contractor. Blackwood's company, the same. But here's the interesting part. Webb's been on the Aegis payroll for 18 months, but his first assignment wasn't overseas. He was tasked with asset identification and psychological profiling for domestic operations. Kate felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. They've been studying me, building a profile, understanding my psychological triggers, mapping my social connections. It gets worse. According to financial records I access through unofficial channels, Webb has been receiving payments for Katherine Reeves' surveillance for the past 6 months. They've been watching you, learning your routines, preparing for this moment. Walsh handed Kate a thick folder. I've been busy since this morning. Bank records, communication intercepts, travel logs. I've built a timeline of the conspiracy, going back 3 years. Kate opened the folder and began reading. The scope of the operation was staggering. Not just intelligence leaks, but arms dealing, money laundering, assassination contracts, and the systematic elimination of anyone who got too close to the truth. This isn't just about selling secrets, she said, looking up from the documents. This is about building a private intelligence network that operates outside government oversight. With Richard Blackwood at the center, Aegis Solutions is just the public face. Underneath, there's a network of former intelligence officers, military contractors, and private security firms that function as a shadow government. Kate's phone rang, interrupting her reading. Mitchell's name appeared on the caller ID. "Kate, where are you? We need to move on the Blackwood operation immediately. I'm still reviewing the intelligence. There's no time." Blackwood just moved. Up his departure from the city. If we don't act tonight, we lose him. Kate looked at Walsh, who was shaking her head vigorously. The FBI agent had been monitoring radio traffic, and her expression suggested that Mitchell's urgency was either manufactured or being driven by forces he didn't understand. "Give me the operational details," Kate said into the phone. "I'll meet your team at the staging area." Negative. This is a solo operation. Too many people increase the risk of compromise. I don't do solo operations against high-value targets without backup. Kate. Mitchell's voice carried a note of steel. "This is not a negotiation. You will proceed to the Meridian Hotel. You will locate and neutralize Richard Blackwood, and you will extract with the intelligence materials he's carrying. That's an order. And if I refuse, then you'll be arrested for treason and spend the rest of your life in federal prison." The line went dead, leaving Kate staring at the phone. Around her, the library continued its quiet hum of activity. People researching genealogy and browsing magazines, unaware that they were witnessing the moment when a decorated military officer had to choose between loyalty to her chain of command and loyalty to her own survival. "He's forcing your hand," Walsh said quietly. "Classic manipulation technique. Create artificial urgency, limit options, demand immediate compliance. Or he's legitimate and time really is running out. Either way, you're walking into a kill box." The Meridian Hotel is in downtown D.C., 15 floors, multiple exit points, private security, and God knows how many hostile assets positioned to take you out the moment you show your face. Kate closed the folder and stood up. "Then I guess I better not show my face. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if people want to use my psychology against me, they need to understand that I've spent 5 years studying their playbook too. They expect me to follow orders, to trust the chain of command, to walk into their trap like a good little soldier." Walsh's eyes lit up with understanding. "But you're not going to do what they expect." "I'm going to do exactly what they expect, but not the way they expect it." Kate gathered her things and prepared to leave. "Give me your phone number. The real one, not the one you've been using for official communications." Walsh wrote down a number on a slip of paper. "What do you need?" "Backup. The kind that doesn't show up on any official roster." "Kate, I can't authorize, I'm not asking you to authorize anything. I'm asking you to be there if things go sideways. Off the books, no official involvement, just one soldier helping another." Walsh studied her face for a long moment. "What makes you think you can trust me?" "Because if you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. And because right now, you're the only person I know who isn't part of Mitchell's operation or Blackwood's network." As Kate walked out of the library, she felt the familiar weight of pre-mission anxiety settling over her shoulders. But underneath, the anxiety was something else, something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Purpose. The Broken Woman Act was officially over. Katherine Reeves was about to disappear forever. And Lieutenant Colonel Kate Chen was going hunting. The Meridian Hotel sat like a glass and steel monument to corporate excess in the heart of downtown D.C., its lobby filled with the kind of people who considered themselves masters of the universe. Private security contractors, defense consultants, former intelligence officers turned entrepreneurs. They moved through the space with the casual arrogance of those who profited from the world's chaos. Kate observed the scene from across the Street, using the reflection in a coffee shop window to study the hotel's exterior while appearing to read a newspaper. Her tactical assessment was grim. At least 6 security checkpoints between the street and the conference level, multiple overlapping fields of observation, and enough private military contractors in the area to staff a small invasion. If this was a trap, it was a sophisticated one. Her earpiece crackled with Walsh's voice. "I count 12 potential hostiles in the lobby alone. This isn't a security conference, it's a damn convention of killers. Copy that. What's the status on building schematics? Uploaded to your phone 5 minutes ago. Service elevator access through the parking garage, but you'll need a key card." Kate touched the stolen security badge clipped inside her jacket. Getting it had required breaking into the building management office and copying the credentials of a maintenance supervisor. "Not elegant, but effective. I'm going in. Maintain overwatch and be ready to extract." "Kate, I still think this is a trap." "Yes, you've mentioned that. But sometimes the only way through a trap is to spring it on your own terms." Kate crossed the street with the measured pace of someone who belonged in the area, her appearance carefully crafted to blend with the administrative staff who supported the conference. The dark suit, professional demeanor, the kind of invisible competence that allowed her to move through secure areas without drawing attention. The parking garage was 3 levels underground, a concrete maze that smelled of exhaust and industrial cleaning compounds. Kate found the service elevator and used her stolen keycard to access the restricted floors. The ride to the 15th floor seemed to take forever, each second stretching as she ran through the mission parameters. One more time. Primary objective: locate Richard Blackwood and identify his security protocols. Secondary objective: gather intelligence on Aegis Solutions operations. Tertiary objective: get out alive. The elevator opened onto a service corridor that ran behind the main conference areas. Kate could hear the low murmur of conversation from the other side of the walls, the sound of powerful people making deals that would never appear in any public record. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Conference room 1547. Come alone." Kate stared at the message, her blood turning cold. Someone knew she was in the building, knew her location, knew she was coming. The text could only have come from someone with access to the hotel's security systems, someone who'd been tracking her movements since she entered the garage. The smart play would be to abort, extract immediately, and regroup with better intelligence. But Kate had spent 5 years making smart plays, 5 years avoiding conflict, 5 years running from every challenge that might require her to be who she really was. She was done running. Conference room 1547 was at the end of the corridor, isolated from the main conference areas. Kate approached with tactical caution, her hand resting on the grip of her concealed pistol. The door was unlocked, opening onto a standard corporate meeting room, long table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Richard Blackwood sat at the far end of the table, exactly as she'd seen him in the photographs. Tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of cold intelligence that had made him successful in both government service and private enterprise. But what made Kate's breath catch in her throat was the man sitting beside him, Colonel James Mitchell, her commanding officer, her recruiter, the man who'd sent her into this trap. "Hello, Kate," Mitchell said, his voice carrying none of the warmth it had held during their previous meetings. "Please, have a seat." Kate remained standing, her hand still on her weapon. "Interesting company you're keeping, sir. Richard and I go way back. West Point, Ranger School, Special Operations Command. We've been working together for longer than you've been in the Army." Blackwood leaned forward, his pale eyes studying Kate with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Lieutenant Colonel Katherine Chen, decorated officer, exemplary service record, psychological profile suggesting extreme loyalty to chain of command. You've been quite the project." "Project?" Mitchell stood up and moved to the windows, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. How do you think we've been funding black operations for the past decade, Kate? Congressional oversight, budget restrictions, rules of engagement that tie our hands while our enemies operate without constraints. The old system is broken. So you decided to fix it by selling classified information to hostile nations? We decided to fix it by creating a new system. A private intelligence network that operates outside government restrictions, funded through selective information sharing and military contracting. Aegis Solutions is just one arm of a much larger organization. Kate felt the pieces falling into place, the scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. You've been building a shadow government, using official channels to gather intelligence then, selling it through private contractors to fund operations that would never receive official approval. Operations that need to happen, Blackwood said, his voice carrying the conviction of a true believer. Terrorists eliminated without trials. Weapons dealers removed from the equation. Hostile agents neutralized before they can strike. We do what the official system can't. By murdering American soldiers, Mitchell turned from the window, his expression hard. The Somalia operation was a necessary sacrifice. We needed to eliminate a double agent who was feeding information to congressional oversight committees. Your team was collateral damage. The admission hit Kate like a physical blow. Her soldiers, her responsibility, her guilt, all of it had been orchestrated by the man she'd trusted with her life and the lives of her people. You killed them, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You killed my people to protect your operation. I killed 3 soldiers to save thousands. That's the calculus of command, Kate, something you never understood. Kate's hand moved to her weapon, but Blackwood raised his own pistol with casual precision. I wouldn't, if I were you. The room is surrounded, and Agent Walsh is currently in federal custody for unauthorized surveillance activities. The news about Walsh hit Kate harder than she'd expected. The FBI agent had been her only ally, the only person she'd trusted in a world where everyone else seemed compromised. What do you want? Kate asked. The same thing we've always wanted, Mitchell replied. Your skills in service of a cause that matters. Join us, Kate. Use your abilities to eliminate threats that the official system can't touch. Become an assassin, you mean? Become a soldier in a war that your government is too weak to fight. Kate looked around the room, taking in the positioning of the security cameras, the placement of furniture, the distance to potential exits. Even if she could neutralize Blackwood and Mitchell, there would be backup forces waiting outside. This wasn't just a recruitment pitch, it was an execution chamber. And if I refuse? Blackwood smiled, and the expression was entirely without warmth. Then you become a cautionary tale. A decorated officer who suffered a psychological breakdown, started believing in conspiracy theories, and eventually turned to terrorism. Your attack on this security conference will be tragic, but not entirely surprising, given your documented mental health issues. The frame job you've been building for years. 5 years of careful preparation. Bank records, communication intercepts, psychological evaluations that show a steady decline in mental stability. When the security footage shows you shooting up a conference room full of security contractors, everyone will understand that you finally snapped. Mitchell moved closer, his expression almost paternal. It doesn't have to end that way, Kate. Join us. Use your skills for something that matters. Help us build a world where good people don't have to die because politicians and bureaucrats are too weak to make hard choices. For a moment, Kate considered the offer. The official system had failed her, had left her broken and alone while the people responsible for her team's death went unpunished. The network Mitchell and Blackwood had built offered purpose, resources, the ability to strike back at enemies who operated beyond the reach of conventional justice. But it also offered corruption, murder, and the systematic betrayal of everything she'd sworn to protect. I have a counteroffer, Kate said finally. Oh? Blackwood raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? You let me walk out of here, and I don't kill everyone in this room. Mitchell laughed, the sound echoing off the conference room walls. Kate, you're outnumbered 20-1. There are hostile assets on every floor, overwatch positions covering all the exits, and backup teams standing by. Even if you were still the operator you used to be, which your psychological profile suggests you're not, you couldn't fight your way out of this building. Kate's smile was thin and sharp, carrying a hint of something that made both men take an involuntary step backward. James, you seem to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? You think I came here to escape? The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing the conference room in a hellish red glow. But in those 3 seconds of absolute darkness, Kate had moved with the predatory grace of someone whose training had been burned into muscle memory through years of repetition. Blackwood's scream was cut short by the sound of his larynx being crushed. Mitchell was fumbling for his weapon when Kate's knife found the nerve cluster in his shoulder, paralyzing his gun arm. The tactical radio in his ear crackled with confused voices as his security teams tried to understand what was happening. Lights out on 15. Primary hostile neutralized. Secondary hostile compromised. All teams converge on conference room 1547. Kate relieved Mitchell of his weapon and communication gear, her movements economical and precise. The colonel lay on the floor, his face gray with pain and shock, his right arm hanging useless at his side. The Somalia ambush, Kate said, kneeling beside him. Who else was involved? Go to hell. Kate pressed the tip of her knife against Mitchell's carotid artery, applying just enough pressure to let him feel the sharpness of the blade. I can make this quick, or I can make it last. Your choice. There's a whole network. Congressional. Staffers, Pentagon officials, CIA officers. You can't stop all of them. Maybe not, but I can stop you. Kate. Mitchell's voice was strained but urgent. You're making a mistake. The people we eliminate are enemies of the state. Terrorists, arms dealers, foreign agents. We're the good guys. Good guys don't murder. American soldiers to protect their operations. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the greater good requires. The knife slid between Mitchell's ribs with surgical precision, finding the heart and ending the conversation. Kate had heard enough justifications, enough rationalizations for betrayal dressed up as patriotism. Her earpiece crackled with Walsh's voice. Kate, whatever you just did, it triggered every alarm in the building. You've got about 30 seconds before the whole place comes down on you. I thought you were in federal custody. I got better. Now move your ass. Window nearest the door. There's a maintenance platform 15 feet down. Kate moved to the indicated window, using Mitchell's body to break the glass. The cold night air hit her face like a slap, carrying the sounds of sirens and helicopters that were converging on the hotel. Below, she could see Walsh's position in the building across the street, along with the muzzle flashes of her rifle as she provided covering fire against Blackwood's security teams. The maintenance platform was exactly where Walsh had promised. A narrow catwalk that provided access to the building's exterior equipment. Kate dropped through the window and began her descent, using her tactical training to move quickly, while remaining unseen from the ground. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Package secured. Extraction point Alpha, 5 minutes. Kate smiled grimly as she rappelled down the side of the building. The package was the intelligence materials Blackwood had been carrying: financial records, communication logs, operational details that would expose the full scope of the conspiracy. She'd managed to secure them during the confusion following the lights out, while Blackwood was choking on his own blood and Mitchell was bleeding out on the conference room floor. But the real victory wasn't the intelligence. It was the knowledge that she'd finally stopped running from who she was. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Chen was back, and the people who destroyed her life were about to learn what happened when you cornered an apex predator. The war was just beginning. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in Arlington, the kind of place that intelligence agencies maintained for situations that required complete operational security. Walsh had led Kate there through a maze of back alleys and service tunnels, using surveillance detection routes that would have impressed even the most paranoid spy. But as Kate sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the intelligence materials she'd recovered from Blackwood's briefcase, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were only seeing the tip of a much larger iceberg. Jesus Christ, Walsh muttered, looking up from a financial spreadsheet. They've been moving money through 17 different shell companies, funding operations in 43 countries. This isn't just an intelligence network, it's a multinational criminal enterprise. Kate was focused on a different set of documents. Personnel files for what appeared to be a private army of former special operations soldiers, intelligence officers, and military contractors. Names she recognized, faces that belonged to people she'd once served alongside, skills that had been honed in service to their country and were now being used for profit. Marcus Webb isn't just surveillance, she said, holding up a mission report. He's been running wet work operations for them. Political assassinations, corporate espionage, targeted killings disguised as accidents or suicides. How many people are we talking about? At least 200 active operators, maybe twice that in support roles. And that's just what they're documenting in these files. Walsh leaned back in her chair, the enormity of the conspiracy settling over her like a weight. We're not dealing with a few rogue agents selling secrets. This is a parallel intelligence structure that's been operating for years. Kate's phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize. The caller ID showed only unknown, but something about the timing made her nervous. "Answer it," Walsh said, activating a recording device. "But keep them talking." Kate accepted the call and put it on speaker. "This is Kate." "Hello, Colonel." The voice was electronically distorted, but she could hear the smugness underneath the digital modulation. "I understand you've been having an eventful evening. Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching your career with great interest. Someone who knows that you've just made the biggest mistake of your life. Killing Blackwood and Mitchell? Thinking that they were the head of the snake. Richard and James were middle management, Colonel. Useful, but ultimately expendable. Their deaths will barely register as a footnote in our operational history." Kate felt ice forming in her veins. "What do you want?" "To offer you a final opportunity. To reconsider your position. You've demonstrated remarkable capabilities tonight. Capabilities that could be very valuable to the right organization. I'm not interested in working for murderers." "Murderers?" The electronic voice carried a note of amusement. "Colonel, you killed 2 men tonight. Agent Walsh has eliminated at least 4 more in the past hour. How exactly does that make you different from us?" Kate looked at Walsh, who nodded grimly. The FBI agent had been busy during Kate's extraction, neutralizing Blackwood's security teams with professional efficiency. "We're stopping criminals," Kate said. "You are criminals. We're stopping threats to American national security. Sometimes those threats happen to be American citizens. Sometimes they happen to be inconvenient witnesses. Sometimes they happen to be decorated military officers who ask too many questions. Is that a threat? It's a fact. You have approximately 12 hours before your existence becomes problematic. Every law enforcement agency in the country will be looking for you. Every intelligence service, every military unit, every private security contractor with a federal contract. The resources arrayed against you will be overwhelming." Kate's mind raced through the implications. If the conspiracy had tentacles reaching throughout the government, they could manufacture evidence, issue arrest warrants, and mobilize massive manhunts. She and Walsh would be fugitives with nowhere to run and no one to trust. "What's your offer?" she asked. "Simple. Surrender yourself at a location we'll provide. Submit to debriefing about your intelligence gathering activities. Accept assignment to our organization with full operational authority. And if I refuse, then you become a terrorist threat to national security. The manhunt will be brief but thorough. Agent Walsh will be killed resisting arrest. You will be neutralized during a tactical assault on whatever location you're foolish enough to use as a hideout." The line went dead, leaving Kate and Walsh staring at each other across the kitchen table. Around them, the safe house suddenly felt very small and very exposed. "How long do you think we have?" Walsh asked. "Not long. If they can mobilize official resources, they'll start with traffic cameras, cell phone tracking, credit card monitoring. They'll build a search grid and start closing it from all directions." Walsh moved to the window and peered through the blinds. No obvious surveillance yet, but that doesn't mean much. Professional watchers would stay back, use technical assets. Kate was already gathering the intelligence materials, preparing them for transport. "We need to move. Multiple vehicles, different routes, separate destinations. Where? Somewhere they won't expect us to go." "Which is where, exactly?" "They've got resources we can't match, connections we can't compete with, and 5 years of psychological profiling to predict our moves." Kate paused in her packing, struck by Walsh's words. 5 years of psychological profiling based on Katherine Reeves, broken veteran, victim of circumstances. "They think they know how I think, how I react, what my limitations are, don't they? They know who I've been pretending to be. They don't know who I really am." Kate pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she hadn't called in years. The person who answered spoke with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to late-night emergencies. Sergeant Major Rodriguez. "Elena. It's Kate Chen." The silence that followed was heavy with surprise and concern. Elena Rodriguez had been Kate's senior non-commissioned officer during her last deployment, a career soldier with 30 years of experience and the kind of tactical intelligence that kept units alive in hostile territory. "Colonel? Jesus, where have you been? We've been worried sick since you disappeared after the discharge. It's complicated. Elena, I need a favor. The kind that doesn't appear on any official records." "What kind of favor?" "The kind that involved people shooting at me and my needing a place to regroup." The guard, young, professional, clearly former military, examined her badge with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, I'll need to call ahead and get authorization. This is a time-sensitive matter involving national security. I don't have time for authorization protocols." Behind the guard, Kate could see the facility's main lobby, marble floors, corporate art, a reception desk manned by someone who looked more like a fashion model than a security professional. It was designed to project success and legitimacy, but Kate's trained eye picked out the defensive positions, the bulletproof glass, the discreet weapon storage points. "I understand, ma'am, but our protocols require," Walsh's voice shifted to the tone that federal agents used when their patience was exhausted. "Son, I'm investigating the murder of a federal agent and the theft of classified information that threatens national security. Either you let me inside to do my job, or I'll have a tactical team here in 20 minutes that will tear this place apart looking for evidence." The psychological pressure worked. The guard stepped aside, radioing ahead to notify his supervisors of the federal presence, but allowing Walsh and Kate to enter the building. They were inside. The lobby was even more impressive from the interior. Soaring ceilings, expensive furniture, and enough marble to build a small monument. But Kate's attention was focused on the security checkpoint they'd need to pass to reach the elevators. X-ray machines, metal detectors, biometric scanners, all the tools necessary to ensure that visitors were properly screened before accessing the building's sensitive areas. "Agent Walsh," said a voice from across the lobby. A man in expensive suit was approaching, his smile professional, but not quite reaching his eyes. "I'm David Sterling, Facility Security Manager. How can Aegis Solutions assist the FBI today?" Walsh maintained her federal agent persona, all business and barely controlled impatience. "I need access to your personnel records, financial systems, and any communication logs from the past 6 months. Sterling's smile never wavered, but Kate could see the calculation behind his eyes. "I'm afraid that would require a federal warrant. Company policy, you understand." "What I understand is that you're obstructing the federal investigation, not obstructing. Following proper legal procedures." The conversation was a dance, each side probing the other's boundaries while Kate used the distraction to study the building's internal defenses. Security cameras covered every angle, but their positioning suggested they were designed more for monitoring employees than repelling assault teams. The real security would be in the lower levels, protecting the servers and communication equipment. That contained the conspiracy's operational secrets. Kate's earpiece crackled with an update. "Colonel, you've got incoming. 3 vehicles, tactical teams, estimated arrival in 4 minutes. The window was closing faster than planned." Kate made a decision that would either save the mission or get them both killed. "Sarah," she said quietly, using Walsh's first name to signal that the performance was over. "Time to go." Walsh understood immediately. "Mr. Sterling, I'm afraid we're past the point of legal niceties." The FBI agent's weapon appeared in her hand with practice speed, trained on Sterling's center mass. Around the lobby, other security personnel began reaching for their own weapons, but Kate was already moving. The martial arts training that had made her effective in special operations wasn't designed for sport or competition. It was designed for lethality. The nearest guard went down with a crushed larynx before he could draw his weapon. The second collapsed with a dislocated knee and a concussion. The third managed to clear his holster before Kate's knife found the nerve cluster in his shoulder. "Security breach," Sterling was shouting into his radio. "Level 1 compromised. All teams respond." Walsh put 2 rounds into the security checkpoint's control panel, sparking and smoking as the electronic locks failed. "Elevator bank now." They moved through the lobby like a 2-person tactical team, covering each other's movement while security alarms shrieked overhead. Kate could hear the sound of boots on stairs, radio chatter, the systematic response of a professional security force. But they were inside the perimeter now, and Kate had spent years learning how to exploit the advantages of being inside an enemy's defenses. The elevator required a key card, which Kate liberated from Sterling's unconscious form. They rode down 3 floors in silence, both women checking their weapons and preparing for what they'd find in the building's underground levels. "Whatever happens down there," Walsh said as the elevator slowed, "I want you to know that this has been the most insane, terrifying, and ultimately satisfying investigation of my career." Kate smiled grimly. "Sarah, this isn't an investigation anymore. This is war." The elevator doors opened onto a corridor that looked more like a military bunker than a corporate office. Concrete walls, industrial lighting, the kind of utilitarian design that prioritized function over form. But it was the sound that made Kate's blood run cold, the distinct hum of high-capacity computer servers, the electronic heartbeat of a digital surveillance network. They were in the right place. The server room was protected by a steel door marked with biometric scanners and electronic locks that would have challenged most special operations teams. But Kate had brought more than her military training to this mission. She'd brought the accumulated rage of 5 years spent believing that her soldiers had died because of her failures. The explosive charge was small, precisely placed, designed to destroy the locking mechanism without damaging the servers beyond. The detonation echoed through the underground level like thunder, and when the smoke cleared, the path to the conspiracy's digital heart was open. Inside, the server room hummed. with the electronic energy of thousands of computers, processing millions of pieces of data. Financial records, personnel files, operational reports, communication logs, 5 years of criminal conspiracy stored in digital form. Kate plugged in the data extraction device Vasquez had provided, watching as terabytes of information began flowing to secure servers that couldn't be compromised or destroyed. Everything they needed to expose the network, identify the conspirators, and prove the scope of their crimes. How long? Walsh asked, watching the door for signs of pursuit. 3 minutes for the financial records, 5 for the personnel files, 10 for the complete operational database. We don't have 10 minutes. Kate could hear them coming, tactical teams moving through the building's upper levels, security forces converging on their position, the systematic sweep of professionals who knew their building's layout better than the intruders. Then we make the time. Walsh moved to the corridor entrance, using the concrete walls as cover while she prepared to hold off whatever came down those stairs. Kate continued monitoring the data transfer, watching as the conspiracy's secrets flowed into the digital equivalent of safe hands. 7 minutes. They needed 7 more minutes. The first tactical team appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving with the careful precision of soldiers who understood that they were facing opponents with significant combat training. Walsh's first shots drove them back into cover, but Kate could hear more teams moving into position, preparing for a coordinated assault. "Sarah, we need to move. Give me 30 more seconds." The data transfer was at 80% completion when the tactical teams began their assault. Flashbang grenades filled the corridor with light and sound, followed by automatic weapons. Fire that chewed chunks out of the concrete walls. Walsh returned fire with disciplined precision, but she was outnumbered and outgunned. Kate made a decision that went against every tactical manual she'd ever read. She left the data transfer, running, and joined Walsh in the corridor firefight. 2. Special Forces veterans against an unknown number of tactical contractors. The odds were impossibly bad, but Kate had been in impossible situations before. The difference was that this time, she wasn't fighting to retreat. She was fighting to win. The gunfight in the underground corridor of Aegis Solutions lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, but it felt like hours. Kate and Walsh fought with the desperate efficiency of soldiers who understood that defeat meant death, using every advantage the confined space provided. But it was the sound of additional explosions from the building's upper levels that finally turned the tide. Vasquez and his team had arrived, hitting the facility from multiple directions while Kate and Walsh were extracting the digital evidence from below. "Colonel, this is Vasquez. Building is secured. Hostiles neutralized or in custody. You're clear to extract." Kate looked at the data transfer device, which showed completion at 96%. Close enough. The financial records, personnel files, and operational databases they'd captured would be sufficient to expose the conspiracy and identify the people responsible for 5 years of betrayal and murder. "Sarah, we're leaving." Walsh fired one last, burst down the corridor, driving the remaining security forces back into cover, then followed Kate toward the emergency stairwell. They climbed 3 flights in tactical formation, weapons ready, expecting resistance at every level. But the building was eerily quiet. Vasquez's team had been thorough. They emerged into the main lobby to find a scene that looked like a small war had been fought. Broken glass, overturned furniture, and the unconscious forms of security personnel, who'd been neutralized with professional efficiency. But no bodies. Vasquez's team had used non-lethal force whenever possible. "This way," called a voice from the main entrance. Master Sergeant Luis Vasquez stood silhouetted against the morning sunlight, his tactical gear and professional bearing exactly as Kate remembered from their combat deployments. Transports waiting. As they exited the building, Kate could see the scope of the operation. Vasquez had coordinated multiple vehicles, a helicopter providing overwatch, and at least a dozen operators providing security. It was the kind of military precision that reminded her why she'd chosen to serve with these people in the first place. "Luis," she said, gripping his shoulder, "thank you. Colonel, we've been waiting 5 years for you to call. When you finally did, there was never any question about the response." They drove away from Aegis Solutions in a convoy that looked like a military operation, which in many ways it was. But instead of serving a government that had been compromised by corruption, they were serving the ideals that had originally motivated their service: protecting the innocent, defending the Constitution, and ensuring that justice was served. Kate's phone rang as they reached the highway. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the timing suggested it was connected to their assault on the Aegis facility. "This is Kate. Colonel Chen." The voice was electronically distorted, but she could hear the anger underneath. The digital modulation. "You've made a serious mistake." "Have I? You think destroying one facility will stop us? You think capturing our financial records will expose our network? You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people are involved, how many systems we control." Kate looked out the window at the Virginia countryside rolling past, thinking about the data they'd captured, the evidence they'd secured, the people they'd trusted with their lives to make this mission possible. "You're right," she said finally. "I don't know how deep it goes, but I know something you don't." "What's that?" "I don't care." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, the distorted voice spoke again. "Explain. You've spent 5 years building a case against me, manipulating my psychology, using my guilt to keep me isolated and vulnerable. You think you understand how I think, how I react, what my limitations are. Don't we? You understand Katherine Reeves, broken veteran, victim of circumstances. But you never understood Lieutenant Colonel Kate Chen, United States Army Special Forces, hunter of men." Kate could hear background noise on the call voices, radio chatter, the sound of a command center in crisis. Her assault on Aegis Solutions had clearly disrupted more than just one facility. "The difference," she continued, "is that Katherine Reeves would have kept running, kept hiding, kept letting you define the terms of engagement. But Kate Chen doesn't run from a fight. She wins it. This isn't over." "You're right." "It's not. Because in about 6 hours, everything we captured from your servers is going to be released simultaneously to every major news organization, congressional oversight committee, and law enforcement agency in the country. Financial records, personnel, files, operational databases, 5 years of criminal conspiracy exposed for the world to see. You can't prove. I can prove everything. Bank transfers, communication logs, assassination contracts, arms deals. I can prove that you murdered American soldiers to protect your operations. I can prove that you've been selling classified information to hostile nations. I can prove that you've built a criminal network that reaches into the highest levels of government." The call ended abruptly, leaving Kate staring at her phone. Around her, the convoy continued its movement toward the safe location where they would coordinate the final phase of their operation. "Think they'll try to stop the release?" Walsh asked. "They'll try, but it's too late. The information is already distributed across multiple secure servers, with automatic release protocols that can't be stopped or recalled." Kate had learned from the conspiracy's own methods, using redundancy and distributed networks to ensure that their evidence couldn't be suppressed or destroyed. Even if she and Walsh were killed, even if Vasquez's team was eliminated, the truth would still emerge. The safe house was an abandoned military facility in rural Maryland, the kind of place that didn't appear on any official maps but could provide everything they needed for a tactical operation: communications equipment, secure internet connections, and defensive positions that could hold off a small army. Over the next 6 hours, Kate and her team worked with methodical precision to prepare their evidence for release. Financial analysts who interpret the money flows, intelligence specialists to decode the operational reports, legal experts to ensure that the evidence would stand up in court. But the most important work was being done by Walsh, who was using her FBI credentials to coordinate with law enforcement agencies across the country. Arrest warrants, asset seizures, tactical raids, the systematic dismantling of a criminal network that had operated in the shadows for years. At exactly 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the evidence was released simultaneously across multiple platforms. News organizations began broadcasting special reports about the intelligence conspiracy. Congressional leaders called for immediate investigations. Law enforcement agencies launched coordinated raids against targets identified in the Aegis Solutions database. Kate watched the coverage from the Safe House's communications center, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion that reminded her of successful combat operations. The mission was complete, the enemy was defeated, and justice was finally being served. But the personal cost had been enormous. 5 years of her life spent in exile. Soldiers who died because she'd trusted the wrong people. A careful constructed identity that she'd used to hide from responsibilities that had never really gone away. Any regrets? Walsh asked, joining her at the bank of television monitors. Kate thought about the question for a long moment, watching as news anchors described the scope of the conspiracy, the number of people involved, the systematic betrayal of public trust. Yeah, she said finally, I regret waiting 5 years to do this. On the screens, federal agents were leading former CIA officers away in handcuffs. Pentagon officials were being arrested at their suburban homes. Defense contractors were watching their companies collapse as their illegal activities were exposed to public scrutiny. The network was being dismantled piece by piece, its members facing the justice they'd avoided for years. But Kate knew that the real victory wasn't the arrests or the prosecutions. It was the knowledge that the truth had finally been told. Her phone rang one last time. The caller ID showed Elena Rodriguez's number, and this time Kate was certain. It was really her former sergeant major. Colonel, I've been watching the news. Hell of a thing you've done. We've done, Elena. Couldn't have managed it without you and the team. What's next? Kate looked around the safe house, at the soldiers, who'd risked everything to help her expose the conspiracy, at the evidence of a mission accomplished against impossible odds. Now we go home. Where's home for you, Colonel? For 5 years, home had been a run-down apartment in a neighborhood where she could disappear, where Katherine Reeves could hide from the world and from herself. But that woman was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that running from responsibility was just another form of betrayal. I don't know yet, Kate said honestly. But wherever it is, I won't be hiding anymore. The next morning, Kate stood in the cemetery where her soldiers were buried, looking down at gravestones that marked the end of lives cut short by betrayal and conspiracy. She'd been afraid to visit this place for 5 years, afraid that seeing their names carved in stone would confirm her worst fears about her own failures as a leader. But now she understood that her failures hadn't been in Somalia, they'd been in the 5 years since, when she'd allowed guilt to silence her, when she'd let the people responsible for their deaths continue their crimes without consequence. I'm sorry, she said to the 3 graves that held the remains of soldiers who'd trusted her with their lives. I'm sorry it took me so long to get them, but they're finished now. All of them. Walsh stood beside her, saying nothing, understanding that some conversations were meant to be private. As they walked away from the cemetery, Kate felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the false peace of hiding from responsibility, but the genuine peace that came from completing a mission, serving justice, and honoring the memory of people who deserved better. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Job offer. Legitimate this time. Call when you're ready to serve again. Kate looked at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. There would be other offers. other opportunities to use her skills in service of causes that mattered. But for now, she was content to walk in the sunlight with a friend who'd risked everything to help her find the truth. Katherine Reeves was dead. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Chen was finally home. 6 months later, Kate stood in a congressional hearing room, raising her right hand to swear an oath to tell the truth about everything she'd witnessed and everything she'd done. The committee was investigating intelligence oversight failures, and her testimony was a key component of their efforts to ensure that such a conspiracy could never operate again. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. The chairman of the committee leaned forward, his expression grave. Colonel Chen, in your opinion, what systemic changes are necessary to prevent future intelligence networks from operating outside government oversight? Kate thought about the question, about the 5 years she'd spent running from responsibility, about the soldiers who died because good people had failed to hold bad people accountable. Mr. Chairman, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak on such matters, the system didn't fail because of inadequate oversight or insufficient resources. It failed because good people decided that their comfort was more important than their duty. Explain. Every successful conspiracy requires the silence of people who know better. Every criminal network depends on the complicity of people who choose not to act. The intelligence leak you're investigating succeeded for 5 years because hundreds of people in positions of authority decided it was easier to look the other way than to ask hard questions. The committee room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the assembled officials like a challenge. What's your recommendation, Colonel? Kate looked at the faces around the room: senators, representatives, staff members, journalists, all of them part of the system that was supposed to protect the American people from the kind of conspiracy she'd exposed. Remember that serving your country isn't a job, she said. It's a sacred trust. And when you betray that trust, when you choose personal advancement over public service, when you decide that your career is more important than your conscience, you become the enemy. As she left the hearing room, Kate reflected on how far she'd traveled from the broken woman who'd been terrorized by teenagers in a convenience store. The journey had cost her everything she thought she wanted, but it had given her back everything she actually needed: purpose, honor, the knowledge that when evil people do evil things, good people have an obligation to stop them. Katherine Reeves had been a victim, a woman defined by her losses and limitations. Kate Chen was a soldier, a woman defined by her choices and her courage. And she was just getting started, preparing and narrating. This type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.